Welcome to Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News is brought to you every Wednesday here from the SPNN studios in St. Paul. Now this evening we are going to be giving a report on the Hillcrest development and the efforts that are underway to create a master plan for the development of the Hillcrest golf course. Now, if you've been watching this program on a regular basis, you probably saw our news reports we had a few months back. One when it was determined that there was contamination at the site, contamination that's estimated to cost about $2.5 million to clean up. And then you probably heard and watched our news program where we covered where the St. Paul City Council decided to agree to $10 million in general obligation bonds so that the St. Paul Port Authority could buy the contaminated property. Well, we have a few clips here where we want to go back in time to July of this year when the City Council took that action, just in case you missed that particular City Council meeting of the St. Paul City Council. So let's take a look at our first clip.
Item number 95, Ordinance 19-39, granting authority to the Port Authority of the city to issue and sell general obligation bonds to which the Port Authority pledges the full faith, credit, and resources of the city pursuant to the provisions and by authority of said Minnesota statutes, Chapter 469 and 475 as amended.
Well, we are expecting a brief report from the Port Authority.
You heard it. The full faith and credit of St. Paul is going to back those general obligation bonds to buy the old Hillcrest golf course. Now, here's a little background on that particular property. First of all, if you're not familiar where it's located, it is located at the intersection of Larpenteur and McKnight Road. And on the one side of the street is Maplewood, and on the other side of the street where the Hillcrest golf course is, well, that is St. Paul. And then if you go across on the other two corners of that intersection, that's Maplewood. So that's the location of this golf course. Now, this particular golf course had actually been in operation since about 1921. And the amount of acreage at this site is 112 acres. And it was in about 2011 when apparently there was a bankruptcy proceeding and the pipe fitters union, they purchased the Hillcrest golf course and the clubhouse there. And they, at that time, when they bought it out of the bankruptcy, they paid about $4.3 million for that piece of property. Now, I do not know if at that time it was known that the property was contaminated or not, but that was the price that the pipe fitters union paid for the property. $4.3 million. And at that time, they promised to keep the golf course open for at least 2 years. Well, as time went on, it turned out that the golf course actually stayed open until about 2017 when it closed. Well, then here are the pipe fitters. They've got this piece of property, a nice big piece of property. Lo and behold, they find out, it's contaminated, and it's contaminated with mercury from all the fungicide that's been used at the golf course for the greens all these years back to 1921. So now there's a big problem. So there's a piece of property that they're trying to sell, and they paid $4.3 million for it. It's going to take $2.5 million to clean it up. it doesn't sound like they're going to get a very good deal from somebody who wants to buy this land, because obviously who's ever going to buy it is going to have to clean it up. Lo and behold, along comes Moneybags Port Authority of St. Paul, and they say, oh, this is an excellent opportunity. We would love to buy this piece of property. We could have a master plan. We could develop all kinds of things there. Oh, this is wonderful. And you paid, pipe fitters, you paid $4.3 million, and it's going to cost $2.5 million to clean it up. Well, you know what? I think we're going to buy it for $10 million. Now, does that math add up to you? Well, anyway, that's the way the math added up. So here we are, as you heard, at the St. Paul City Council meeting in July 2019, where, of course, the Port Authority, they are just another arm of St. Paul, and they are going to the City Council and saying, we need you now that we've committed to buying this property. We're closed on the property, but now we need to have you put the full faith and credit of the City of St. Paul on the line to pay for, to get that $10 million in general obligation bonds so that we can finish the deal. So that's where we're at. So let's continue with our next clip as you hear a report from the Port Authority.
Here today in support of the Port Authority's issuance of $10 million of general obligation bonds for the acquisition of the Hillcrest golf course site. As you know, we believe the site is an incredible opportunity for redevelopment, able to produce as many as 1,000 jobs and up to 1,000 housing units.
I'm going to pause you quick.
Yes.
Is this your first time testifying before us?
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
I'm 2 weeks into paternity leave, so I've got dad brain, I will admit.
Okay. Well, we're just going to reset quick. Would you mind starting just by introducing yourself and then start in, just so that we know who you are, but just because it's taped and not everybody does.
I'm Monty Hillman, Senior Vice President of Redevelopment with the St. Paul Port Authority.
Welcome.
Thank you for your
It's
time
wonderful to
today.
have you here.
Would be happy to answer any specific questions you have, and I know there is some detailed information that was included as attachment to the ordinance, exhibit to the ordinance. But again, the Port Authority views this as an incredible opportunity to provide economic development and a mix of land uses on the east side of St. Paul at a very affordable price for the public sector to engage in a brownfield redevelopment that otherwise has been hindered by numerous constraints to the private sector.
Numerous constraints by the private sector. Yes, the contamination cleanup of $2.5 million. However, we do know that there are various different funds available that can be tapped into by developers, just as there are by the City of St. Paul, which more than likely the City of St. Paul is going to tap into. And one thing is that you may not know about the Port Authority of St. Paul. And generally speaking, I mean, there's all kinds of details about it that you can look up and read about on the internet, but just so that you have a brief understanding about the Port Authority, is that the Port Authority is a 7-member board of commissioners. Now, these 7 commissioners to this board are all appointed by the mayor of St. Paul. So you see, it is indeed just an arm of city government. Now, it has been traditional that of those 7 members on that board, that 2 of them are members of the St. Paul City Council. So currently, right now, the 2 members of the St. Paul City Council that are on the Port Authority board as Port Authority commissioners is Council Member Daitau and Council Member Nelson. And so they are the 2 from the council that are on the Port Authority. But you may be wondering who are the other commissioners on the Port Authority? I mean, what are their interests? What is their background? Will that give us a clue as to what their bias might be, what their mission is, what their soft spot is for in their heart when it comes to development? Who are they? Well, you know, just in general, one of the commissioners is a significant player in an organization called Project for Pride in Living. Now, we heard about how the Port Authority is looking at this as a great opportunity for up to 1,000 housing units. Another representative who's on that Port Authority commission, on board rather, is somebody from Western Bank. Another individual who is a commissioner on the Port Authority board is from Merrill Lynch, real estate. Okay. Another person is from Xcel Energy. And then, get this, one of the members on that Port Authority board is from the St. Paul Building Trades. So my question is that when it was decided that they were going to buy this property from the Pipe Fitters Union and basically help them out by giving them 100% profit on their investment of $4.3 million, did the board member who is from the St. Paul Building Trades recuse himself, considering that there really is a very close tie between the Pipe Fitters Union and the Building Trades Union? Good question. I don't know the answer, but it gets you thinking. So let's take a look at our next clip from the Port Authority presentation.
But again, we do believe that the site has the capacity to house as many as 1,000 housing units, up to 1,000 jobs, and approximately $250 million of private investment, which would ultimately, at full build-out, generate over $5 million in annual property taxes. The city planning staff is preparing to launch a master planning process later this fall. The Port Authority will be actively engaged in that, be a robust community engagement exercise, I understand, speaking with our colleagues at PED. And of course, we intend to deliver outlots to the marketplace in accordance with the results of that master plan.
Great. And I mean, obviously, there's uniform support here for this ordinance, so you know that the project is something we support.
So there is broad support on the St. Paul City Council, obviously, since they voted unanimously for the $10 million in general obligation bonds to pay for the commitment that the Port Authority made in purchasing this property. Now, two things. You heard that the aspirational goal is that there's going to be up to 1,000 jobs created by the development of this site. Well, that could possibly be, but you have to consider what type of jobs are they talking about? What is the concentration going to be of those commercial enterprises that are going to produce these jobs? Are we talking about jobs that are minimum wage jobs, even considering $15 an hour being minimum wage? Or are we talking about jobs that have a more sustainable income for people who are looking to possibly purchase their own home rather than having to rent all of their life? Because you see, many times people have that aspiration that they would love to buy a home, but unfortunately they're unable to find the work on the east side of St. Paul in order to make enough income to have that debt-to-income ratio that is appropriate so that they can get approved for a home mortgage. Now, here's the other thing he indicated, is that he's looking at approximately up to 1,000 housing units. Now, let's think about what kind of density we're talking about if that is the case. When you look at block, a general block, acre rather, in a developed city. If you look at an acre, it is very common that in single-family housing zoned areas, that an acre supports 4 to 6 housing units per acre. And even if you were thinking, let's have the maximum 6 units per acre, well, then that would mean if this site were 112 acres, and let's say you've got the 12 to 15 acres that they say they want to set aside for green space. Let's say we have 100 acres then to work with. And if you were able to put single-family housing on every single one of those acres with no commercial, no parking lots or other kinds of amenities that you might need to have if you're going to have mixed-use development. But it's just all housing. And you had 6 units per acre, and you have 100 acres, well, we're only talking about 600 units. And he's talking about having over 1,000. So that gives you an idea of what kind of density we might be talking about with the housing units. Because if they're going to have space set aside for up to 1,000 jobs, and then they're going to have the land use such that they're going to have up to 1,000 units, there's probably going to be some areas of that development where it's going to be just like it is in the Gladstone neighborhood, where the housing density is designated at 50 units per acre. Now, we don't know that for sure, but if you just look at what some of the other communities are doing, particularly what Maplewood's doing, you can almost extrapolate to understand exactly what there is coming down the line. Now, I had mentioned a little bit about the fact that there is contamination at this property site as well. And the city of St. Paul is going to have to figure out how to crack that nut as well. How are they going to find the money to take care of that? They claim that they're not going to necessarily be giving out incentives to developers, but yet, how are they going to entice developers to come to develop if there has to be the brownfield cleaned up? Well, we had a film footage from one of our most recent Maplewood City Council meetings where County Commissioner Victoria Reinhardt was in front of the Maplewood City Council talking about a program that Ramsey County has for exactly this purpose. Let's take a look.
So, one of the things that we are looking at is, and I want to point out, is the, partnering in economic development. Ramsey County is the only fully developed county in the state, which means increasing our tax base becomes more difficult. And the fact is, we have room to develop, but it's really redevelopment, and that's the difference here. And that leads me to what I really want to make sure you understand, and don't forget that this tool is available to you, and that is the Environmental Response Fund. We set it up so that if there is a project, but there is pollution in the land or on the property, that we can provide funding that, but for the cleanup costs, it wouldn't be developed. And so the Environmental Response Fund is something that if somebody is coming to you and saying, we'd like to redevelop this, or we'd like to develop something here, but there's such a cost in the cleanup that it wouldn't make it viable for them. So please remember that that is out there. We have tried very hard to make sure that we divvy that fund up between the suburbs and the city of St. Paul. Primarily because the city of St. Paul could take it all, so we're very careful about trying to make sure we get it into the suburbs as well. So please know that that tool is available to you.
The city of St. Paul could take it all, of course, because by this time, when she's speaking in front of the city of Maplewood and their city council, the St. Paul Port Authority has already purchased this property, and everybody knows that it's going to be $2.5 million to clean it up. Now, here's my prediction. My prediction is this, is that St. Paul is going to be looking to Ramsey County to contribute money out of this fund. Ramsey County is going to say, oh, but we want to save some money for the suburbs because that would only be fair. Well, then, of course, then they'll wink, wink, say no more, and talk to the people at Maplewood and say, you know, this would be really good for Maplewood to have Hillcrest taken care of right across the street. You know, Hillcrest is almost in St. Paul, so even though this money is all going to go to St. Paul, and Maplewood's not really getting any of it, you're probably going to really benefit from it a lot. So can we have a letter of support? Can we have a letter of support to say, yes, oh, we support St. Paul and the Port Authority getting this money from Ramsey County to do the environmental cleanup at the Hillcrest Golf Course development site. Can you just see it happen now? Anyway, we'll keep our eyes open and see if my prediction comes true. Now, the reason that we're leading up to all of this is because, as you heard in that the Port Authority clip, one of the stages in this whole process is developing a master plan for the Hillcrest development. Certainly we know we've got $10 million into it already, but you have to hire consultants, you have to hire PR firms, you have to hire all kinds of people to do things in order to bring the plan to fruition. And one of those steps is the community engagement to create and weigh in on the master plan that all the planners have already developed, okay? And so the Hillcrest Community Advisory Committee was formed. They've had a couple of meetings so far, but last night on December 17th, they had their meeting, and we had our cameras there so that way we could bring you this news report on the discussions of the Community Advisory Committee to this Hillcrest development, and their discussions that will eventually lead up to talking about the master plan. So that is what we have for you tonight, is film footage from that meeting. Now we're going to get started where they start to introduce themselves so you have a feel for the representatives who are there on the committee, but also for the people who are there from the Port Authority, from the City of St. Paul, from the consultants, from the PR firms. So you get the picture. So let's take a look at our clip.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming and showing up for this meeting. I think we'll probably have a couple of stragglers here in a little bit. I think we have more consultants than we have committee, but that's I think some meetings are gonna go that way. Why don't we start out? I'd like everybody to introduce themselves. And you know, Kevin, since he's filming, I'm gonna have you introduce yourself and what you're doing, and then how about I'll start? I'm Linda Martinez-Higgins. I am a Maplewood resident and co-chair of the committee.
Kevin Berglund, we have a production group called Put Your Hands Together Productions. So you can find us on Public Access St. Paul Neighborhood Network, Channel 15, or on YouTube, or in a lot of other places too. So we've been doing this for many years.
Okay.
So we will have an hour show and have commentary. So anybody here, of course, is welcome to come on if they ever want to.
Okay.
By the way, we would not be here if the city would be filming this. Then we would just use their clips.
Okay.
I'm Andy Joy. I'm here as a representative of the Planning Commission, but I'm also a neighbor. I live over on Maryland and McMinn.
My name is Q Vane, and I am here as the housing representative.
Rachel Panazzo-Dahl. I live like 3 blocks away, and I'm the Greater Eastside Community Council liaison.
Catherine Murray, I'm resident of St. Paul.
Hi, Tiffany Scott Knox, resident of Maplewood. Tom Tao, St. Paul resident representing the business community.
Bill Dermody, city staff, project manager.
Tim Scanlon Johnson, Bill's intern. City's intern.
Okay.
I'm Regina Flanagan. I'm with the Cunningham team.
Andrew Dressner with Cunningham.
Cole Dorius, I'm working with the team also with Zan Associates.
I'm Mike Richardson. I am a planner supporting the project.
Tom Goodrum with the Port Authority. James Soltis, WSP Civil Consultant with the Port Authority.
My name is Pearl Huang. I'm a Ward 4 resident and also a policy advocate at the Alliance.
And my name is Jamie Kavanaugh. I'm a community organizer at Jewish Community Action in St. Paul.
George Haney, I'm a senior project manager with St. Paul Port.
Okay. Thank you.
It appears that they have almost as many or more consultants or people from the city and the Port Authority than they do from of the members on the committee. Well, that's certainly an interesting ratio. So let's continue as they begin their discussion.
It looks like you're first up.
Okay, yeah, I have a brief but very positive process status update, and that is we have a contract. With the Cunningham Group and Associates, the whole team. So very glad to have them on board and participating tonight. As far as the timeline, the delay in getting under contract probably set us back just a little bit, maybe a month. But mostly we're still in the timeline that we talked about previously, about a year and a half for the master plan. So, that's it. And unless you have other questions, I'd like to turn it over to the next item on the agenda.
Now, one of the handouts that was there last night is a memorandum from the city planner to the Hillcrest Community Advisory Committee, specifically talking about the Hillcrest Technical Advisory Committee, which is abbreviated TAC. And it says here that they were formed to guide the Hillcrest Master Plan regarding technical issues and establishing policy as applied to the site. The TAC consists of staff experts from Ramsey County, so I think that Ramsey County is very involved with this, and again, this supports the idea that they're going to be contributing money to the cleanup. Maplewood, Metro Transit, and several City of St. Paul departments and divisions such as planning, zoning, site plan review, parks, transportation, sewer, water resources, finance, legal, housing, and economic development. The Port Authority attends all TAC meetings to allow the property owner views and realities to be incorporated. So you see, technically, the Port Authority is listed as the owner of the property. However, as indicated, they are just sort of an arm of St. Paul. And it does say here that over its first 3 meetings in 2019, the TAC and the Port Authority have worked towards consensus on technical and policy inputs to provide to the consultant team for reference as they create 3 to 4 site concepts in 2020. Community priorities to be identified through upcoming community engagement and confirmed by the Community Advisory Committee, and will also guide creation of those site concepts. So far, this sounds like the whole process is being driven by this Technical Advisory Committee, which is made up all of these experts and city staff and planning people and consultants. And that the role of this Community Advisory Committee is to, as it says, confirm community priorities. They're just there to confirm community priorities. That's what this memorandum says. Now, I believe that most people who serve on a community advisory committee believe that the reason that they're serving on it as volunteers is so that they are the voice of the community, that they are helping to drive the policy, to create the policy. And yet some of the people have the sentiment that this was really more of a dictate to them of what their role is going to be, which is really just to be part of a dog and pony show. Now let's hope that as it progresses, it doesn't actually turn out that way, but we know how these kinds of things worked out from our coverage of the Rush Line and the Community Advisory Committee there. That in essence, most of what they do is hear an update on what's been done, and then ask questions on what's been done, give a little input, and then go home, because that's all the time there is and all the room for discussion that is given to them. So let's continue though with our meeting from yesterday of the Hillcrest Community Advisory Committee.
Next item is Plan for Community Engagement Consultant Team.
Fast? Yeah. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Very nice to see everyone again. Glad you could make it. Thanks for having us here. As you know, my name is Andrew with County Hemp Group. I've been to a couple of the presentations, a couple of these meetings already. We're going to talk and work with you through public engagement over the next 20-30 minutes or whatever is needed. Before we jump into that, though, you know me, so I'm not going to introduce myself anymore. I'd like Regina and Cole to just kind of introduce themselves, get to know you a little bit. The three of us are three of a team of, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 people. So instead of us all being here at once, coming here one by one. So.
Hello, I'm Regina Flanagan, and I'm really honored to be able to contribute to this team. I am St. Paulite from across town, which is how I got here in my I am a sole proprietor of our landscape design, and I'm an artist and a landscape architect both. And so I will be contributing to the community engagement process, talking with you about cultural issues, which is broadly construed as the habits and ways that you live in your community, very broadly. So I'll be working with Cole and Sam.
Okay, now as we look at this memorandum, it ties in very well with how this is being introduced to the members of the committee. It says here that this following memo summarizes the main points of input from the TAC, the TAC, and the Port Authority that are likely to significantly impact site concepts. And this is in bold, this next sentence is in bold. We seek the Community Advisory Committee's thoughts on issues to highlight and the best way to convey them to the public during the engagement process. So in other words, they are saying in this sentence that they are going to tell them what the concepts are, what the ideas are that have already been decided and worked through by the TAC and the Port Authority, and that they're going to run them by this committee so that they can tell them which things to highlight, which things do you think that the community is going to be positive about. So we can highlight those, so we can focus on those, and then all the rest of it will maybe not be noticed so much. How can you help us PR this thing to get the buy-in from the community? That's what this sentence in bold means. And particularly then when they say, and the best way to convey them to the public during the engagement process. In other words, they are looking to use these folks not as the voice of the community to come up with the ideas, to promote the ideas that the community wants to see, but to take the ideas that are already been created in the back room and decide and tell them which ones are the most positive ones and how are they going to help the city and the Port Authority to get these ideas out to the public and get the buy-in from the public. That's the way I read this. Well, let's continue on with our film footage as they continue to talk about the public engagement.
Hi, I'm Cole. I work for Zan Associates. We are a communications and engagement firm, so we work around transportation planning projects around the state. So we're gonna, what I focus on mainly is creative engagement, reaching out to people who usually don't spoken to about these projects, trying to come out with new ways and new strategies to reach as many people as possible. The work I do is, I'm also a public artist, so I try to incorporate as much art as possible, whether it be, just marking on the sidewalk to huge spectacles of different displays and traveling art that can collect ideas from people. So that's kind of a little bit about me. I'm going to get way more into it in a minute, so leave it at that.
Perfect. Okay, so our public engagement with you and your broader community, it happens a whole bunch of different ways. It's going to be monthly with you, but there will be roughly three times throughout the process where we will be engaging outside of this room. Okay, and those 3 times will be roughly sort of January, February, roughly May, June, and roughly September, October. Okay, so there's sort of 3 times. Now within each of those periods, we will be doing a bunch of things. We'll be doing open houses, we'll be doing pop-up meetings, and we'll be doing targeted engagements. Okay, so open houses are sort of a broad thing that we will, part of what we'll talk about tonight is how to make them fun and decent and excellent to come to. Pop-up meetings are very lightweight meetings that occur where people already are, so we're not asking them to come to them, we go to them.
These are all the same techniques that we have reported on that are used by Ramsey County and the Rush Line Advisory Committee and working through that whole thing and decimating the Bruce Vento Trail. And how can we get the community buy-in to bring that Rush Line, that purple line, BRT, up the Bruce Vento Trail, decimating an ecological treasure, and we're going to have a pop-up along the trail. Now the problem with these pop-ups is that with the pop-ups there is little or no opportunity for people of the community to really hear what other people of the community have to say about the project. So it's very easy that you could have one person being told an answer to a question and then another person being told an answer to that same question, given a different answer. And so it's not a reliable way of getting input in that it's hard to keep your comments recorded. When you as an individual go to one, you don't even know if your comments are being recorded anywhere or being logged or being counted whatsoever. It's not the same as at a meeting where minutes are being taken or that there's video or audio where then the commissioners or whoever's making the decisions can then listen and hear what those comments are. And so we see this time and time again, this same type of MO. And one thing that I wanted to bring up is that, you see, I've got a copy of the agenda from last night's meeting, okay? And this agenda, it's very simple. It is certainly very straightforward. You know, it's got the welcome, the status of where the process is. We've heard that. Now, the plan for community engagement, that's where the consultant team, it says, is going to give their little spiel. And then they're going to eventually, and we don't have time for it tonight, but we will on another program, have the policy and technical priorities from the Technical Advisory Committee. But you see, nowhere on this agenda is there a line item for community input, for public comment. Now, if they really wanted to engage the public, they would invite the public to these meetings because they are open to the public, so the public can go. But there's not much of an opportunity to invite the public because, first of all, you can see how small the meeting room is that they have put this meeting into. How can you get many people from the public into this meeting to hear what is being talked about if you have a room that's under capacity? It's kind of the same problem that Ramsey County had for their truth and taxation hearing that we covered, where it was held at the library and it was overflow. There was, people standing in the entryway, outside the entryway to the room, trying to hear comments, trying to get to the microphone to give comments. So you see, that's one way to really squelch public comment, is to put your meeting into a room that is under capacity for the interest in the issue. And certainly a lot of people are very interested in the redevelopment of the Hillcrest golf course site. I mean, many people are interested, not just people in St. Paul and on the east side, but people in Maplewood as well. So you see, if they wanted to have more community engagement, you would start with the structure of your meetings and that you would have public comment on the agenda and allow for that as part of the meeting. Now, what's interesting and fascinating that we found out is that these meetings of the Technical Advisory Committee, where really all the decisions are being made, where all the real information is being distributed between all the members who are doing all the planning, is that those meetings are not open to the public because we asked. And they are closed meetings because, you see, they don't have any elected officials there, so they don't have to follow the open meeting laws, and they can just do all their planning in private. Now, certainly, a person could, through the Minnesota Data Practices Act, could ask for the data that's being generated from those meetings of the Technical Advisory Committee. Certainly could be asking for the documentation that is being distributed at those meetings, because all of that data is public data. But you see, none of that data, from what we could tell, was at the meeting last night for the Hillcrest Community Advisory Committee. Now, this puts the Community Advisory Committee in sort of an awkward position because they're supposed to be advisory, but how good is your recommendations and your advice if you don't have all the information upon which the Technical Advisory Committee is building their policy from? How can you really analyze whether or not what they're promoting to you as a Community Advisory Committee member is somewhere, credible and accurate if you don't have the raw data yourself to be able to analyze it. So certainly, the community advisory members, committee members, could ask for that data, but would they get it? Or would they just get the response that says, well, we'll give you a summary and we'll bring it next meeting and that'll work, right? And then if they were to do a data practices request for that information, well, then it would make it seem like that they were being adversarial. And that doesn't create a good working relationship either. So you see, it's really difficult to be one of these members on a community advisory committee, because I am confident that many of the members on that committee want to do right by their community, by their neighbors, and be able to speak about what are the concerns, to help guide the policy, to help guide the development, when in reality, their real role is only simply to help PR and get the buy-in of the community and to help with the PR. Well, let's take a look at our continuing footage as they discuss community engagement.
And then targeted engagements are sort of these very strategic and clinical events which might have to be multilingual. Again, they'll be coming, come to you in your community as much as possible, but those will be very, really carefully defined to engage those who they typically slip through the cracks of these processes. So those sort of three things: bigger open house meetings, targeted engagements, and pop-up meetings, happening at those three sort of different chunks of time. The first set in January is really information gathering, and Cole and Regina will talk a little bit more about that.
Or probably February.
Right, yeah, we might be able to get a little bit in January. There's probably more so in February. That's just sort of the basic overall kind of arc of the public engagement as it relates to reaching out and having face-to-face communication with people outside this room. That kind of makes sense? So basically, it's pretty basic, simple stuff. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Cole, because our process here, our goal here is to talk through these first engagements in January, February, and make sure we leave the room knowing what our next steps are, and possibly even what your next steps are. So, you.
Okay, our next steps now are to talk about those next engagements coming up and how we're going to approach them. How are you, as members of the Community Engagement Committee, Community Advisory Committee, which is their name, I mean, they're really about engagement, how are they going to play a role in these community engagement events? That's what they're going to talk about. That's what they want to talk about. That's what the consultants want to talk about. But let's continue and hear what the members have to say.
Thank you. Okay, so end of January and February, we're going to have these meetings, these pop-ups. And I think what I'd like to do is, you have a wealth of information. I don't have that information yet. And so I either want to have a small group discussion about ideas that you have, if there's activities or events in the community that you know about, if there are people in the community that you know about that need to be reached or would love to be a part of this process. If you want to interject a certain idea that has been worked in the past that you have seen, some sort of activity that you saw at an open house or a pop-up. I have lots of ideas that I've used, and I can certainly list off some of those things as inspiration. One of them being, I have a traveling living room full of games, and I go out to neighborhoods, I go out to libraries, set up games. Again, with that traveling display that I want to make. having information gathering session at that living room. So it's very inviting. You can have some hot cocoa there. So ideas like that. But I was wondering if you all have those as well. If you don't mind, I'd like to go around the room and just ask, what are you thinking for this? We'll start with you. Is that okay?
Yeah, definitely. So this kind of reminds me of when we were working on the Gold Line of the Gateway Corridor. I remember one of the engagement meetings, we did a game where we gave people, let's say, $20, and with $20 you can buy housing or transportation or retail, and so you give them these dollars and they can buy those things and place it on the map of like where they would like to see it. I think that one worked out very well because it helped people really visualize and see what kind of things they can do with that space. I've seen different iterations where it was more conceptual. So they say, okay, we want a healthcare center, or we want this thing, but it was tied to a map that was kind of, it was like an artistic map. So people couldn't really see or understand what was going on in that game. So it made a lot more sense to have like an actual vision or a map of the actual location, but then pin things on and say, okay, this is what I want here, this is what I want in this location. So that game worked out really well in the past. So maybe that's something you consider for this engagement process.
Those are great ideas.
Now, myself personally, I am a visual learner and I like a visual process, but in order for a visual process like that to work, I do believe that the people who are attending have to have some basic knowledge of what are some of the demographics of the area from their own perspective. What about jobs? What about employment? What are the efforts that are going to be taken with regard to any of those? And so it's certainly nice to say that, sure, we can have this art project, we can have this demonstration project, but in order to really get good, meaningful input, I think that your residents have to have more information. Now, this particular meeting last night was held at the Hayden Heights Library. So that's in St. Paul on the east side. So let's continue and hear the comments of the next committee member.
Awesome. How about you?
I'm living like this, but I have experience when I was living in state of Washington, the city they call Tukwila, Washington. We did like this project, but they divided 3 phases. First, it's a big project included for the library, the housing, and the business. So what they did, first 3 months or 4 months, we did for the survey, for the neighborhood, included for the library, community center, church, for the mosque, all the area. We did the survey. So after that, the city was hired the people they call conductors, which is split for the wares and do some paper and everything, every Friday, every Saturday, they go for the area, knock for the door, and they give for the to encourage for the community. So after that, I'm one of them, the conductors, and also I was the board for the like this board. So it was working 2 years, and for that project. So what I know, my experience, and still to start this way, I like more the community engagement and the survey, and the people tell other what the project is about. If the community did not know for the project itself, it's a very difficult to community to inform. So that makes it, but I haven't been what like what they did.
Osmond, for my clarification, you're saying, so the surveys were done in these various entities, and then you said there was a connector, so there was someone that was a representative to go back and for it to explain.
I was one 5 of them for the connector, even though I was born, also the city they hired 5 of us, and we did for the community, and not only survey, but also still 2 years we working for the between city and the neighborhood and the people to inform about it. And also we did it for the open house. So quickly what they did to the other people, when they the day they will open house, they build at least three buildings to show how it will look like the buildings they want to build next 2 years or 3 years. So people already, they know.
So they
how
had, by that time, you had examples
Right.
to show them.
Right.
Yeah,
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 so
so
that-
that's like down the
Yeah.
road somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like there was a lot of interaction with the community to
Right.
build trust and to get buy-in to the project.
Yes.
That's great.
Now, this gentleman, his concept of community engagement, I think is more along the lines about what many of us think community engagement is about. That you get the information out to the community, then you actually go out to find out what they have to say about the information you gave them. He indicated that they had a survey in this particular project he was working with. I know that in the Gladstone neighborhood, back in 2005, that the Gladstone Coalition at that time did much the same thing, that they put together a survey that actually had several different options with regard to different development scenarios of the Gladstone community at the Frost and English intersection and radiating out from there. And then from that information, asked them to fill out a survey to get a more particularized viewpoint of the neighborhood as to what they were looking at when it came to density, when it came to their neighborhood amenities, and many of those things. Now that, of course, is much more labor intensive than just simply having a little pop-up where you got a bunch of staff people hanging around looking at the posters. But it's more authentic than the little poster at the pop-up. So we are getting near to the end of our program. So we are going to continue this news report. We've got a lot of film footage from this meeting, but we wanted to give you an introduction to what is going on in the development of the master plan for the Hillcrest redevelopment area. And we're going to also keep up with the other meetings that they have as well. Now, please stay tuned to the end of our program, where we will show the information on how you can find us on YouTube and that you can subscribe to our news programs. And we're going to have the film footage of these meetings also up on YouTube in the next couple of weeks or so that way you can watch them and not have to necessarily wait for the next newscast to hear more about what the discussions were. Now, one thing that in our last couple of minutes here I want to share with you, that in this particular memorandum that we were looking at earlier, talking about the financing, it says, due to Port Authority commitments to the City Council, all land sales and nearly all infrastructure costs are required to be market rate and market supportable. The one potential exception to this is advanced energy systems, especially if funded by non-city sources like grants or outside investors. And so that is, I know a lot of people are concerned about the financial aspect of this, but because that was a commitment that they made to the City Council, at least it's in writing, and so we can count on that. Well, I want to thank you very much for tuning in to this episode of Off the Record News. I hope that it's given you food for thought, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.